I'm writing this down because I can't carry it anymore. Not after what happened. The envelope arrived yesterday. Plain white, no return address, just my name handwritten in blue ink. Inside was a small folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, as if it had been torn from an old notebook. 5 words, written in careful, deliberate letters. I never forgot your promise. My hands haven't stopped shaking since. 20 years is a long time to keep a secret. Long enough that the sharp edges of memory begin to dull, that you start to believe the lies you've told yourself. Long enough that you convince yourself it wasn't real, that it was just a terrible dream. But it wasn't a dream, and Jem Kartal wasn't a ghost. The summer I turned 11 was the hottest in Oak Ridge history, the kind of heat that warps the air above the pavement and turns the wheat fields brittle and golden. Our town had 1 main street, 3 churches, and about 1,000 residents who all seemed to know your business before you did. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened until something did. My father ran the hardware store, a creaking wooden building with uneven floorboards and the permanent smell of sawdust and metal. We lived in a 2-story house at the edge of town, where the neat rows of homes gave way to sprawling farmland. My mother had died when I was 4, cancer, quick and merciless, and it had just been Dad and me since then. He wasn't much for talking, my father. He was the kind of man who expressed love through fixed bicycles and freshly mowed lawns. The Kartals moved to Oak Ridge that May. They took over the old Simmons place, a weathered farmhouse about a half-mile down the dirt road from us. Mr. Kartal was a professor at the community college in the next town over. Mrs. Kartal stayed home and tended a garden that quickly became the envy of the neighborhood. And then there was Chem, their only child. I still remember the first time I saw him. It was at church, the Sunday after they moved in. He was sitting between his parents, back straight, hands folded in his lap. He had dark, serious eyes and the kind of face that seemed older than it should be. When the service ended, my father nudged me forward to introduce myself. "This is my son, Michael," Dad said, his hand heavy on my shoulder. Chem looked at me for a long moment before extending his hand. "Jem Kartal," he said, his voice carrying the faint trace of an accent I couldn't place. His hand was cool and dry in mine, his grip firm. I noticed a small scar that ran across his palm, white against his olive skin. "How'd you get that?" I asked, nodding at his hand. A small smile. "I fell from a tree. In Turkey, before we came here. Does it hurt? Not anymore. That was the beginning." Simple as that. Sam and I became inseparable that summer. He was different from the other kids in Oak Ridge, quieter, more thoughtful. He knew things. He could name every constellation in the night sky. He could identify birds by their calls alone. He could speak 3 languages and was learning a 4th. "My father says knowledge is freedom," he told me once as we lay on our backs in the tall grass behind my house, watching clouds drift across the sky. "The more you know, the farther you can go." I'd never thought about going anywhere. Oak Ridge was my whole world. The abandoned Miller farm became our kingdom that summer. It sat empty about a mile from my house, the family long gone, the fields returned to wilderness. The barn still stood, though its red paint had faded to a dull rust, and parts of the roof had collapsed. Behind it was an old well, a circle of stones about 3 feet high, with a wooden cover that had rotted through in places. We found it on a day when the heat drove us to seek shelter in the barn's shadowy interior. Chem spotted it first, pushing aside tall weeds to reveal the stone circle. "Look," he said, his voice hushed with discovery. Together, we pried off what remained of the wooden cover. The well was dry, had been for years, probably, but it was deep, so deep that when we dropped a stone, the sound of it hitting bottom came back to us like a distant echo. "They used to throw coins in wells," Chem said, "to make wishes. Did they come true?" He shrugged. "Sometimes. If you believed hard enough. We made it our secret place. We brought flashlights and looked down into the darkness. We dropped things, leaves, twigs, more stones, to hear them hit bottom. Once, Xem brought a small mirror and angled it to catch the sunlight, sending a beam of light dancing along the well's stone walls. "See how far it goes?" he said, "like it never ends." I didn't tell him how the darkness of the well made something tighten in my chest, how sometimes, at night, I dreamed of falling into that endless black. The change came in August, just a few weeks before school was set to start. My father had begun taking me to the hardware store more often, teaching me the business. "Someday, this will all be yours," he'd say, gesturing around at the shelves of nails and screws, the stacks of lumber, the tools hanging in neat rows. I didn't have the heart to tell him I had no interest in hammers and levels, in the quiet rhythm of small-town commerce. Not since Cem had started telling me about the world beyond Oak Ridge, about the blue waters of the Bosphorus, the crowded streets of Istanbul, the ancient ruins scattered across his homeland like discarded toys of giants. We were at the store when Sheriff Dalton's daughter came in. Kelly Dalton was 12, a year older than us, with honey-blonde hair and freckles across her nose. She was the prettiest girl in Oak Ridge, and everyone knew it, including Kelly. "Hi, Mr. Hammond," she said to my father. Then, with a smile that made my stomach flip, "Hi, Michael." I mumbled something in response, my face burning. "Who's your friend?" she asked, looking at Cem. "Cem Kartal," I said. "He moved here from Turkey." Kelly's eyes widened. "Turkey? Like where they eat turkey every day?" Cem didn't laugh. "No," he said simply. "It's a country, between Europe and Asia." "Oh." Kelly looked embarrassed for a moment, then recovered with a toss of her hair. "Well, that's cool. You guys should come to my house tomorrow. I'm having some friends over to swim in our pool." I'd never been invited to Kelly Dalton's house before. Never been in a pool, either. The closest thing Oak Ridge had to swimming was the creek that ran through the west side of town. "We'll be there," I said quickly before Cem could respond. After Kelly left, Cem looked at me with those serious eyes of his. "You like her," he said. It wasn't a question. "No, I don't," I lied, "but her dad's the sheriff, and they have a pool." Cem just nodded, but something had shifted between us. A small crack in the foundation of our friendship, hairline thin, but undeniably there. The Daltons' pool was a bright blue rectangle in their manicured backyard, surrounded by a wooden deck where Mrs. Dalton laid out sandwiches and lemonade. There were 5 other kids there, all from families that mattered in Oak Ridge: the bank manager's son, the doctor's daughter, the kind of kids who wore new clothes on the first day of school and went to summer camp in Colorado. I was immediately conscious of my faded swim trunks, of the farmer's tan that made my arms look like they belonged to 2 different people. Beside me, Cem was even more out of place in his 2 formal shorts, his thin chest pale against the bright sun. Kelly, in a pink swimsuit with little white flowers, was holding court at the deep end of the pool. She squealed when she saw us, waving us over. "Michael." And "Cem, right? Come on in, the water's perfect." I looked at Cem. He was staring at the water with an expression I couldn't read. "What's wrong?" I asked quietly. "I don't know how to swim," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Something twisted in my chest, a mixture of pity and, shamefully, a kind of satisfaction. Here was something I could do that Cem couldn't, something he didn't know. "It's easy," I said. "I'll teach you. Just stay in the shallow end." But Cem shook his head. "I'll just watch." Kelly was already leading the others in some kind of diving game, their laughter ringing across the yard. I hesitated, torn between my friend and the blue water, the pretty girl, the chance to be part of something I'd always observed from the outside. "Go ahead," Cem said, seeing my indecision. "I'll be fine." So I left him there, sitting on the edge of the deck, his feet dangling above the water. I dove into the pool, the shock of cool water against my sun-heated skin a kind of rebirth. When I surfaced, Kelly was smiling at me. "Not bad, Hammond," she said, "for a hardware store kid." I grinned, ridiculously pleased. For the next hour, I forgot about Sam entirely. It was Mrs. Dalton who noticed him first. Is your friend okay? She asked, nodding toward the deck. Chem was still sitting in the same spot, but his face had gone pale, and he was staring at the water with such intensity that something cold slithered down my spine despite the hot day. "Sam," I called, swimming to the edge of the pool. "You okay?" He started, as if waking from a dream. "Fine," he said, but his voice was strange. "I'm just going to go home." "What? Why?" But he was already standing, gathering his towel. "Thanks for inviting me," he said stiffly, addressing Kelly but looking at no one. "You can't leave now," Kelly protested. "We're about to have cake. I have to help my mother," Chem said. Then to me, "You should stay. Have fun." Before I could respond, he was walking away, his back straight, his steps measured. I had the absurd thought that he looked like a soldier marching into battle. "What's his problem?" Kelly asked, appearing beside me at the pool's edge. "I don't know," I said, but the lie tasted sour in my mouth. I did know. Xem was out of place here, among these children of Oak Ridge's elite, and I had abandoned him for a girl's smile, for the cool embrace of water on a hot day, for the chance to be someone else for a few hours, someone who belonged. "He's weird," Kelly declared, and the others nodded in agreement. "Is he always like that?" And then, God help me, I said it. "Yeah, he's weird. Always talking about turkey and stars and stuff. Like anyone cares." They laughed, and their laughter was a warm cloak around my shoulders, protecting me from the cold shame that had begun to seep into my bones. I stayed at the Daltons until the sun began to set, eating cake, playing games, soaking up Kelly's attention like a desert plant in the rain. But when I finally rode my bike home, the sweet glow of belonging had faded, replaced by a gnawing discomfort that sat like a stone in my stomach. I told myself I would apologize to Chem tomorrow, that I would make it right. I didn't know then that tomorrow would be too late. The next day dawned hot and hazy, the air thick with moisture that promised a storm later. I rode my bike to the Cartal's house, rehearsing what I would say to Chem. "I'm sorry I left you. I'm sorry I said those things. I'm still your friend." But when I arrived, Mrs. Cartal told me Chem wasn't feeling well. "Fever," she said, her accent more pronounced than her son's. "Maybe tomorrow." I nodded, relief mingling with disappointment. A reprieve, then. One more day to find the right words. With nowhere else to go, I headed to the Miller farm. I didn't expect Chem to be there, but some part of me hoped anyway. The barn was empty, the air inside still and heavy with the scent of old hay and dust. I made my way to the back, to our well, and there he was. Chem was sitting on the stone edge of the well, his back to me, looking down into the darkness. He must have heard me approach, but he didn't turn around. "Your mom said you were sick," I said, my voice seeming too loud in the quiet barn. "I asked her to say that," he replied, still not looking at me. "I didn't want to see you." The words stung more than I expected. "Look, about yesterday. I heard what you said." Now he turned, and his face was like a stranger's. About me being weird, about no one caring. Heat rushed to my face. I didn't mean it. Kelly and those kids, they're not like us. I just wanted them to like me. "And they did," Chem said flatly, "because you made fun of me." "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." He stood up, and for the first time, I noticed he was holding something. A book, the astronomy guide his father had given him for his birthday. The one he'd shown me with such pride, pointing out the colored plates of distant galaxies, the maps of constellations we would trace in the night sky. "I was going to give this to you," he said, holding it out. "I thought you might want to learn about the stars, too." I reached for the book, but Chem pulled it back at the last second. Something flickered across his face, a hurt so deep it looked like anger. "But you don't really care about that stuff, do you?" he said. "You'd rather be with Kelly Dalton and her friends, laughing about how weird I am." "That's not true," I protested, but the lie was hollow. "You promised we'd be friends forever," Chem said, and his voice cracked on the last word. You promised. I had. On a night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, when the world beyond Oak Ridge felt vast and full of possibility. We'd sworn a blood oath, pricking our fingers with a safety pin and pressing them together. Friendship eternal as the stars, we'd said. Childish, maybe, but sacred to us then. We are friends, I insisted, just because I spent one afternoon with other kids. It's not about them, Kem cut in. It's about you. You're different around them, like you're ashamed of me. The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. I was ashamed, not of Chem, but of myself, of the way I disappeared next to his brightness, his knowledge, his confidence, of how small and ordinary I felt in the shadow of his difference. That's not fair, I said, anger rising to mask my shame. Just because you don't know how to have normal friends. Normal? Kem's laugh was bitter. Is that what you want to be? Normal? Like everyone else in this town who never looks up, who never thinks about anything beyond their own little lives? At least they belong somewhere, I shot back. At least they're not always talking about how much better everything is somewhere else. Kem's face went still. Is that what you think? That I think I'm better than you? Don't you? The words came out ugly, twisted by an emotion I couldn't name. With your languages and your constellations and your stories about Turkey? Always making me feel stupid and small? Something changed in Chem's eyes then. A light going out. I never thought that, he said quietly. Not once. He turned back to the well, looking down into its depths. I thought you were the only person who understood. The only one who saw me. The book was still in his hands, held loosely now, as if he'd forgotten it was there. I took a step toward him, suddenly desperate to take back everything I'd said, to rewind time to the moment before I'd broken something precious. Chem, I'm sorry. But as I reached for him, my foot caught on a loose stone. I stumbled forward, my hand connecting with his back harder than I intended. Chem lurched forward, a look of surprise crossing his face as he lost his balance. The book fell from his hands, disappearing into the darkness of the well, and then, with a cry that I still hear in my nightmares, Chem followed it. The sound his body made when it hit the bottom was nothing like the stones we'd dropped. It was dull, final, a period at the end of a sentence. Sem? My voice echoed down the well shaft, coming back to me distorted and strange. Sem, are you okay? Silence, and then, faintly, a groan. Relief flooded through me. He was alive. Hang on, I called. I'll get help. Another sound from below. Not a groan this time, but words, barely audible. What? I leaned closer to the well's edge. Why? Kem's voice was pained, confused. Why did you push me? I didn't. It was an accident. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure. Had I meant to push him? Had some dark part of me wanted to silence him, to dim his light? Please, Kem said, his voice weaker now. Get my father. I will, I promised. Just hold on. I stood up, ready to run for help. And then I hesitated. What would happen when I told someone what had happened? They would ask questions. Why were we at the abandoned farm? What were we doing near the well? Why had I pushed Yem? Because it would be seen as a push, no matter what I said. And then what? Would they believe it was an accident? Would they call it something else? Fear gripped me, cold and paralyzing. I looked down into the well again. I couldn't see Chem in the darkness, but I could hear his breathing, shallow and pained. Michael? His voice was a whisper now. Are you still there? I should have answered. I should have told him I was going for help. I should have done anything but what I did, which was to turn and run, leaving Chem in the darkness, in the silence, in the depth of that terrible well. The rain came that evening, a summer storm that bent trees and flooded the creek. I sat by my bedroom window watching lightning split the sky, telling myself that I would go back to the well tomorrow, that I would bring a rope, that I would help Sem climb out, that we would never speak of what happened. But morning came, and with it the phone call. Mrs. Cartal, her voice high and tight with worry. Cem hadn't come home. Had I seen him? No, I said, the lie coming easily. Not since the day before. The town mobilized quickly. Sheriff Dalton organized search parties. Volunteers combed the woods, the fields, the creek, swollen now from the rain. Dogs were brought in, barking and eager. Cem's school photo appeared on flyers taped to windows and telephone poles. Missing: Sem Cartal, 11 years old, last seen, wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt. I joined the searches, my stomach a knot of dread. I made sure I was never assigned to the group checking the Miller farm. When they came back and reported finding nothing, I felt a relief so shameful I thought it might choke me. Days passed. The searches continued, but with less urgency. Theories emerged. Cem had run away. Cem had fallen into the creek and been swept downstream. Cem had been taken by a drifter passing through town. No one suggested he might be at the bottom of an old well behind a forgotten barn. No one except the voice in my head, growing louder with each passing day. A week after Cem disappeared, I rode my bike to the Miller farm. I told myself I was going to confess, to lead the adults to the well, to face whatever consequences came. But when I arrived, I found yellow police tape around the property. Do not cross. Police investigation. Through the trees, I could see figures moving near the barn. Sheriff Dalton, Mr. Cartal, other men I didn't recognize. They were looking at the well. I pedaled away as fast as I could, my heart hammering in my chest. They knew. Somehow, they knew. They would find Sem, and then they would come for me. But they didn't. The next day, Sheriff Dalton announced that while they had found some items of interest at the Miller farm, there was no sign of Cem. The search was being scaled back, though not abandoned. Mr. Cartal gave a statement to the local paper, his face haggard with grief, begging anyone with information to come forward. I said nothing. Weeks turned into months. The Cartals moved away before Christmas, unable to bear the weight of their son's ghost haunting every corner of Oak Ridge. I overheard my father telling someone they'd gone back to Turkey. Life resumed its rhythm. School started. I made new friends, careful ones who didn't ask too much of me, who didn't make me feel small or lost or found. I avoided the Miller farm, avoided thinking about wells and darkness and the sound of a body hitting stone. But at night, I dreamed. I dreamed of Cem calling my name from the bottom of a well that never ended. I dreamed of his voice growing fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by silence. Years passed. I graduated high school, went to college in another state, built a life that had nothing to do with Oak Ridge or hardware stores or abandoned farms. I became a graphic designer, creating images and layouts for magazines and websites. I lived in a city where no one knew my name, my history, my secret. But the dreams never stopped. And sometimes in quiet moments I would find myself thinking about Cem, about the stars he loved, about the promise I broke. Did he die quickly at the bottom of that well, or slowly, waiting for a rescue that never came? Did he understand, in those final hours, that I had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible, that I had left him alone in the dark? I never went back to Oak Ridge. My father eventually sold the hardware store and moved to Arizona for his arthritis. We spoke on holidays, exchanged cards on birthdays. The distance between us, physical and otherwise, suited us both. Then, 3 weeks ago, the call came. Dad had died. Heart attack, quick and unexpected. There were arrangements to be made, a funeral to attend, a house to clear out. 20 years to the month since Cem disappeared, I found myself driving back to Oak Ridge. The town had changed less than I had. Main Street had a few new businesses, a coffee shop, a boutique selling handmade crafts, but the rhythm was the same. Slow, predictable, safe. The funeral was well attended. My father had been respected, if not loved. I accepted condolences from people who looked vaguely familiar, who studied my face for traces of the boy I'd been. "You've done well for yourself," they said. "Your dad was proud." I nodded and thanked them, and did not tell them that my father and I had been strangers to each other for years, bound by blood, but little else. After the funeral, after the reception at the church where casseroles and sympathy were served in equal measure, I found myself in my father's car, driving aimlessly through the streets of my childhood. Without conscious decision, I turned onto the dirt road that led to the Miller farm. It was still abandoned, though the fields had been reclaimed by a neighboring farmer. The barn stood impossibly, though even more decrepit than in my memory. I parked the car and sat for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. I didn't want to go in. I didn't want to see. But I had to. The barn door hung from a single hinge, creaking in the slight breeze. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the sweet-rot smell of old hay. Sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, creating spotlights on the dirt floor. I made my way to the back, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The well was still there. The stone circle, the endless darkness. Someone had replaced the wooden cover, a sturdy construction that looked relatively new. There was a padlock on it, rusted but intact. I stared at it, a pressure building in my chest. Who had covered the well? Who had locked it? Had they found Xem after all and kept it quiet? Had they found what was left of him and decided that some secrets were better buried? And then I saw it. A piece of paper, folded and taped to the stone edge of the well. White against gray, impossible to miss. With trembling hands, I peeled it free, unfolded it. 3 words, written in a hand I didn't recognize. "I'm still here." My blood turned to ice. I dropped the paper as if it had burned me, stumbling backward, away from the well, away from those words. It was a joke. It had to be. Some local kid who'd heard the story of the Turkish boy who went missing 20 years ago. Some sick prank. But as I turned to leave, my foot kicked something small and metallic. It skittered across the dirt floor, coming to rest in a shaft of sunlight. A key. Small, tarnished, but unmistakably new. The key to the padlock. I stared at it, my mind racing. This was deliberate. Someone wanted me to open the well. Someone knew I would come here. With a shaking hand, I picked up the key. It felt unnaturally heavy in my palm, a weight far beyond its size. I looked at the padlock, then at the key, then back at the note lying on the ground. "I'm still here." It was impossible. No one could survive 20 years at the bottom of a well. It was a trap, or a joke, or a test. I took a step toward the well, then another. I knelt beside it, key in hand. The padlock was within reach. All I had to do was insert the key, turn it, lift the cover, and look down into the darkness. Instead, I stood up, pocketed the key, and walked away. I told myself I was being rational, that opening the well would accomplish nothing except stirring up old ghosts, that whoever had left the note and key was playing a game I didn't want to participate in. I finished clearing out my father's house. I put it on the market. I prepared to return to my life, to put Oak Ridge behind me once more. But the key burned in my pocket. The words, "I'm still here," echoed in my mind. The night before I was set to leave town, I drove back to the Miller farm. It was past midnight, the moon, full and bright, casting long shadows across the overgrown fields. I brought a flashlight, the key, and a coil of rope I'd found in my father's garage. The barn was a silhouette against the star-filled sky. Inside, my flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust motes that swirled in the disturbed air. The well waited, patient as only inanimate things can be. This time, I didn't hesitate. I inserted the key into the padlock. It turned with a soft click. I removed the lock, set it aside, and lifted the wooden cover. The darkness below seemed to reach up toward me, a living thing hungry for light. I directed my flashlight beam downward, but it was swallowed after a few feet, revealing nothing. "Hello?" My voice was a stranger's, high and tremulous. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Then, faintly, a scraping sound, like stone against stone, or like fingernails against a wall. My heart lurched painfully in my chest. "Sam," I whispered. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was complete, heavy with anticipation. I fumbled with the rope, securing one end to a sturdy beam nearby. The other end I lowered into the well, watching as it disappeared into the darkness. When I felt it go slack, I tugged it to make sure it was resting on the bottom. Then I pointed my flashlight down once more and leaned forward, trying to see what lay below. Something moved in the darkness. A shift, a change in the quality of the black. I jerked back, nearly losing my balance. "Who's there?" I called, my voice breaking. No answer. Just another scrape, slightly louder this time. Deliberate. Fear gripped me, primal and overwhelming. I scrambled away from the well, leaving the rope dangling, the cover lying on the ground. I ran to my car, fumbled with the keys, started the engine. As I pulled away, my headlights swept across the barn entrance. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing there. Thin, motionless, watching. But when I blinked, it was gone. I left Oak Ridge the next morning, driving too fast, putting miles between me and that well. I told myself it was over, that whatever game someone had been playing, I was no longer a participant. 3 days later, I arrived home to my apartment in the city. Everything was as I'd left it, neat, impersonal, safe. I unpacked, ordered takeout, opened a beer. Normal life resumed. Then I checked my mail. Among the bills and flyers was a plain white envelope. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in blue ink. Inside was a small folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. 5 words, written in careful, deliberate letters. "I never forgot your promise." The same handwriting as the note on the well. I dropped the paper as if it were a live thing. It fluttered to the floor, innocent and terrible. How? How had someone found my address? How had they known where to send this? I poured the beer down the sink. I checked the locks on my doors and windows. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, or a practical joke gone too far. That night, I dreamed of the well, of climbing down the rope into the darkness, of reaching the bottom and finding not Chem's body, but an empty space, and a tunnel, leading away into the earth. I woke gasping, sheets tangled around me like restraints. The next day, another envelope arrived. This one contained a single word. Soon. I called in sick to work. I considered going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I was being haunted by notes from someone who might be the ghost of a boy I left to die 20 years ago. That I was afraid of a dead child's revenge? Number. There were no ghosts, only the past, reaching into the present with cold fingers. I changed my locks. I installed a security system. I kept the lights on at night. Still, the envelopes came. One every day, each containing a single sheet of paper, each message shorter than the last. I'm coming. Almost there. Tomorrow. The last one arrived yesterday. 5 words that made my blood freeze in my veins. I'm outside your door now. I didn't look. I locked myself in the bathroom, phone in hand, ready to call for help. I sat there for hours, listening for footsteps, for the sound of someone trying the door. Nothing. When dawn came, I emerged, half convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. The apartment was empty, untouched. No sign that anyone had been there. Except for a small object on the kitchen counter, placed precisely in the center. A key. Not the key to the well, a different one, newer, and beside it, a final note. Your turn to wait in the dark. I'm writing this down because I can't carry it anymore, because I need someone to know what happened, what I did, because whatever comes next, whatever retribution awaits, I've earned it. The sun is setting now. Soon it will be dark. I've checked every lock, every window. I've left lights on in every room. But I know it won't matter. There's a sound coming from somewhere in the apartment, a scraping, like stone against stone, or like fingernails against a wall. It's getting closer. I never forgot the promise either, Sem. Friend eternal as the stars, and the stars never die. They just burn and burn and burn until they fall.